Hello, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. My name's Jason Xie. I'm currently working at the City of Vancouver on various sustainability initiatives, and in my past lives, I've been working at the Vancouver Park Board to support community food systems, so community gardens, kitchen programs, and whatnot, and also in community development, working at Collingwood Neighborhood House for a number of years. Yeah, Tanya. Woo. And
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Cutler. I am a writer and broadcaster on the topic of food gardening, growing food in the city, even when we have some challenges such as extremely expensive real estate and a changing climate that makes it more difficult for us to grow food. But I'm very interested in finding the resourcefulness and the tools to still be able to take some food sovereignty into our own hands. You can find my writing at the Vancouver Observer and Houzz, HOUZZ.com, as well as my own website, abundantcity.net. And I'm also a former correspondent on gardening for Roundhouse Radio. Of course, I'm a gardener. I grow my own food. And the place where I grow my food is a 40-minute bike ride from where I live, because that's what you have to do in a city like this to be able to get access to the land and the space. But nevertheless, my family and I were able to grow just about all of our leafy greens for most of the year last year. I am also a member of the Vancouver Food Policy Council, a former board member of the Environmental Youth Alliance, and I have a cool day job where I get to meet a lot of local and sustainable food entrepreneurs as well.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alexandra. I'm a member of the Migrant Workers Dignity Association. It's an association formed by temporary foreign workers that work in the agricultural industry and other Canadians too. We've been working with migrant agricultural workers for the last 10 years, supporting them in many issues, several issues that I think I'm going to be speaking about today. And yeah, trying to organize ourselves and to be able to bring the voices of those that are part of the food system too, but are not usually part of these events.
wonderful. So I'll just take a minute to introduce the topic. Unfortunately, Tara McDonald, who's from the Vancouver Farmers Market, wasn't able to join us today. She isn't feeling too well, so a speedy recovery to her. So anyhow, we've all kind of heard some of these facts. So the average ingredient in a meal travels 1,500 to 4,000 kilometers before it hits your table. And we've been seeing in a lot of documentaries lately too, generally the horrors of industrial food. Those giant chicken farms or vast fields of monoculture, of GMOs. And we've also heard about often the challenges of maintaining local farms and the threats to our local food systems, whether that's the ALR, and other regulatory and policy issues that have impacts on our local food system. And yet, at the same time, it's kind of amazing that a lot of these facts they don't shock us anymore. This is pretty common knowledge. It's pretty mainstream. And you remember back when people would talk about local food as just food. All food was generally local in many ways. And now the 100-mile diet, farm to table, these terms are quite embedded in our cultural lexicon. So, when we're talking about local food, what is it that we're actually speaking to? It's not necessarily new that food is grown around us. That's definitely something that's happened since the beginning of civilization. But it is a response to these globalizing forces that we've really come to see impact various aspects of our social, environmental, and economic well-being. So, these days we wax poetic about the taste of a beautiful field-grown tomato or a garden-grown tomato. We go to farmers markets just to be around and see the amazing colors that are around us and smell the produce. And we always hear about what it means to be supporting our local farmers and our local economy. So we've come a long way in terms of kind of bringing about this food literacy in our communities. And people are much more aware when they're shopping now. And yet, at the same time, in local news, we often hear about issues that are arising, especially with migrant workers and not necessarily having their rights being sustained, or sometimes even, I remember several years back, blueberry farmers were in the news as well. And so there's a lot of these questions about our food system and what is it that we actually see, and do we actually understand the full scope of the challenges that are happening? Because, in many ways, I feel that our local food system, we talk about it in this really somewhat glorified manner without understanding the logistical challenges that we face and the economic challenges that we're facing. And so today I'm hoping we can really dig into that. So going beyond the hype of local food, and really talking about the question, is local food inherently more just? And, in other words, just because it's local, is it better? And that kind of points to some questions about what are we talking about when we say local food? We have fish farms, salmon farms that aren't too far away. Is that considered local food? I don't think we usually include that in our discussion. And really, what also makes a food system more just? So this idea of justice, what does that mean? So it's really great to have Rebecca and Alexandra here to kind of speak to those points. Since we've kind of done the introductions, I'll just speed right through. Just to say, I love having these open conversations. We are down a panelist today, so we'll probably have more time to have questions later on as well, and there might be opportunities to jump in. But anyway, maybe we'll just start off with the question, what does local food mean to you? Rebecca?
So before this panel happened, I was looking up some definitions for local food, and I came across really interesting conflicts in what we would call local food. In the US, in grocery stores, the definition of local can be anything from, some grocery chains will leave it completely up to individual stores to decide what they label when you go look at the produce section or otherwise as local. So there's absolutely no criteria. Some other chains will say, well, it has to be within the state where it's grown or within an 8-hour drive. But all of those they're really completely different things. And when it comes down to it, this question of what is local food, there's no regulation. It's completely unlike organic, for instance, which is a heavily regulated term. When we get down to it, it is just as much as anything else, although it comes from a place of deep intention, deep learning amongst our society, it is a marketing term. And when we buy something that is being labeled as local or even being labeled as grown in BC, we are making the best choice that we can, but we're also making a lot of assumptions with what we are choosing.
Thank you.
Well, I come from Colombia, where food is grown like everywhere. It's a very productive country, so all food is local there. But when I come here and I start seeing migrant workers coming to grow the food, I start asking what that word means. And also the complexities of understanding or seeing so many migrant workers coming every year. Every year there are more and more migrant workers coming to work in Canada, to work grow and harvest the food that we have at home. So I don't know if I have an answer, but I have this other factor of seeing people that are from other places that have their own farms, grow their own food at home in their home country, at least many of them, and then they come to work in this other food system that is totally strange for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, and in my experience, I mean, a local food system, there are the farmers markets and the people that I've been working on community gardens, so I know what, they consider that to be a very local, hyper-local food, right? And at the same time, my parents, we go shopping at, some of the smaller Asian markets, and so local food, I know that a lot of there's actually a panel I think that's happening right now that's going into the other alternative food systems, but we do have a number of Chinese farmers that are out there growing bok choy and things that the market here will have. That's not often, when I close my eyes and I think about local food, it's not the first image that comes to my head. So I think there's a good diversity in terms of what local means to each of us. Maybe moving on, just a question about, as consumers, we often kind of think we have an idea of what local food means to us, but from a farmer's perspective or a producer's perspective, I was wondering if each of you could also maybe touch on that relationship to local food. I know in some of the discussions we've had, Alexandra, earlier, you mentioned, some of the the food challenges of migrant workers that are around even hunger and issues with nutrition. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, well, migrant agricultural workers they have been coming to Canada for the last 50 years through the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. So it's a federal program approved by the government. So they're not undocumented. So we're talking about work permits and so on. So they've been coming here for the last 50 years. The program started with Jamaican workers, and then other countries started participating in the program too, like Mexico and Guatemala, and the Philippines, and now South Asian too, South Asian countries. So most of the workers that I've been having contact with, they're from Central America. When they come here to work every season, they work for 12 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours. So when they go home, and they live all together on the farm. So the employer provides a house or a truck or whatever the employer wants to house the workers. So their houses with 12 workers sharing one stove with 4 elements, burning things. So they have to do like lines to cook their food when they finish working, like at night, when they get up in the morning and they need to prepare breakfast to go before going to work. So the food needs to be fast, like they have to cook fast, and they also sometimes are very tired to cook a good meal. So I've heard stories of workers eating only a piece of meat or 12 eggs in a meal or just rice. So all the consequences in their health conditions are like very obvious. So we've seen cases of diabetes and blood pressure in these workers that are like increasing, and as their health worsens, they lose more opportunity. They lose opportunities to come back the next season to work in Canada because they have to pass a medical test to be able to come to work every year. So they need to show that they are with good health. But all the situations here that they're going through, the hard work that they do, the amount of hours they work, the days they work, sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes it's only 6 days a week. So it's very hard work for 4 months or 8 months. With that kind of nutrition, it's not like very factible to be able to come back the next year. So workers, when they don't pass the test, they're not allowed to come. So they're not only getting sick, but also getting out of the program too, because nobody's taking care of the workers basically, and they're really very isolated, and the language barrier is also very difficult for them to have access to medical attention too, and because they sometimes don't want to get their employer mad at them, they don't ask for 2 hours to go and visit the doctor. So there are many situations on the farms that are happening that are totally invisible for us in the city, but are like having great impact on workers' life and and humanity.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that kind of paints a little bit of a picture of a lot of people that actually go into supporting our local food system that, we don't often see when we're thinking about local food. Rebecca, what do you see? You work with a lot of people in the city that are sustaining the local food system, urban farmers, and you're connected with kind of getting information out there to people to help them garden. What do you see as the relationship of food for those producers and yourself as well?
Yeah, certainly I can speak to myself. And local food can mean so many different things, as we're seeing. It can be all the way from food that we grow ourselves to the packaged peppers that we find in Costco that are grown by the agricultural workers that Alexandra was talking about. And for me, the closest relationship, of course, is first of all with the food that I grow myself and getting out there into the ground. Gardening is perhaps one of the more easily overlooked parts of our food system. But it is a part that has a really relevant place, I believe, and it's actually one of the key parts of the Vancouver food strategy. Putting our hands into the soil has a number of benefits that some are more obvious than others, but when we begin to grow our own food, it's one of the few ways that we can actually take charge of the food system ourselves and have something that finally gets down to that notion of what we're all thinking when we're thinking of local food, and also builds community both between different socioeconomic sectors, different cultural realms, and different ages, and has a really interesting knowledge transfer. And yet there is definitely a gap between how much people are interested in growing food and the actual ability to do so. We have quite a number of community garden spaces within the city of Vancouver. I believe there's over 4,000 individual plots. And yet to get one of those spaces, there's usually a pretty huge lineup because we have barriers that are pretty obvious. The average person in Vancouver does not have access to do any type of growing. We have some of the most expensive land in the entire world, really, and people that are facing rent evictions and can't even begin to get this knowledge or experience to grow their own food. And obviously, that type of food production is never going to feed the world or feed the city, not even by a tiny percentage. But it can be amazing, certainly in my experience, having grown a lot of food, how much it actually does offset your food costs. It's pretty wild how much you can grow in just a tiny space, especially because this stuff that grows well in a garden tends to be the leafy greens that take barely any space. That can be very expensive. I mean, if you go to a store, it's like, I think it's around $4 on average for one head of organic kale. And so you think about how you can start to offset that and then have, in some cases, dollars that are available to put back into the local food economy. And it is the only form of food production that is not monetary, so we're able to generate it ourselves. But that said, there are a number of larger issues as well, and ones that I don't interface with as directly, but that maybe there are some people in the audience who can speak to it more than me. And that is that the expensive land that we have here in Vancouver is there's an echo to that throughout all of BC. And I know, though it's not my area of expertise, that that puts a lot of pressure on the local food system as a whole. Makes it very difficult for us to have the kind of local food that we want to see, that people certainly in Vancouver, throughout the province, just about everywhere, are really demanding to want to have that local sustainable food. My understanding is that it's very difficult for farmers to make ends meet and actually make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it seems like accessibility is always one of those big issues that we come across when we're speaking about local food. And I've myself have worked with a lot of newcomer immigrants who, there's a farmers market coupon program that the farmers market in the province of BC helps support, and it's a stipend essentially that goes into a set of coupons that people can access local farmers market food from. But otherwise you wouldn't find a lot of people accessing local food in farmers markets because of the perception that the food is too expensive, is more expensive than it needs to be. And we can get into that conversation of what is the true cost of our food, but I think that dealing with talking about the land pressures that probably increase the cost of food to farmers, as well as to consumers as a result, that has a huge impact on how we whose food system we're actually looking at when we're talking about local food systems. So maybe that's one way to kind of talk a little bit about whether or not local food is privileged. Do we see this as a privileged food system? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's totally privileged. I mean, that would be my snap answer. We do have the coupon program within the Vancouver farmers markets. We have some really interesting initiatives that are coming through the Vancouver Food Bank. So there is work that is being done to offset food costs and to have smarter use of the food resources that we have to be less wasteful. But those are certainly not complete solutions yet. Maybe they can be in the future. But there's this challenge that all of us, including people like myself who are employed and have some capital to put back into this economy, we still have perceived that we have enough pressure on us that we want to get food for a similar price at the farmer's market to what we could find in a grocery store. And that puts huge pressure on farmers. Mm-hmm. And it makes things really difficult to correct the food system in general. And so it's something that I don't have a solution for. I'm not sure who would have a solution for that, but there's a lot of work to be done. And certainly local food production can help with some of that, but we're far from having the full answer.
No, I was just gonna add that maybe I don't have the solution either, but I think that we need more other parties to come to talk or to be part of these discussions. And I mean, like, migrant workers need to be here, but also the farmers need to be here. Because I hear a lot of many times that we're talking about the farmers market, but I don't know if we're talking about the large-scale farmers too. And as far as I understand, they're part of the food system too. They have a huge power, like the lobby that they are able to do and the things that they have been able to achieve. I think that they need to be part of these discussions, or we're going to be just talking among ourselves. Like, maybe we're not going to be able to advance in the conversation, maybe. But I want to just to add something about what I was saying before, just to give you like a perspective of the scope of the program, of the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. There are around 30,000 migrant workers in that program. In BC, there are around 5,000 to 6,000, and every year we hear the workers saying, "Oh, the employer is going to bring more workers this year or next year." So we can see that the farmers are making good profits because I assume, if you're getting more workers, it's because you're having good production, or you're investing a lot in the production. And I'm not an economist, but I think that that's the way that I understand it. And also, I just want you to tell you that these migrant workers are growing and picking the cherries, peaches, and apples that are coming from the Okanagan. They're working in the nurseries, the greenhouse, in Landner. The huge nurseries are full of migrant workers growing the tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers. And also there are workers in Langley, in middle-sized farms, working 12 hours on their knees, working, picking and taking care of the lettuce and other vegetables too. So they're here, they're part of this community too, and they need to be hearing or being part of these discussions, as well as the farmers, their employers, because I think that they need to hear consumers' perspectives and also workers' views.
And it sounds like you often, as a spokesperson, essentially, not a spokesperson, a representative of migrant workers, you're called upon to kind of articulate it, but it doesn't necessarily translate to inclusion. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a certain amount of change that can be made. So I think it kind of speaks a little bit to maybe the power dynamic that's usually within the food system that helps maintain it a certain way. So what are some steps that, aside from, like, when we're talking about inclusion, how could you see that actually happening? How can we include migrant workers in discussions, aside from, let's say, maybe inviting them here, but also in other ways that you've seen, other opportunities that you've come across?
Well, I'm pretty sure that many people here go to farmers markets. There are workers in those booths, some of the booths. There are many families selling their the produce in those booths, but you can also find migrant workers. And one way, I was thinking that one way to know if a farmer is like a good employer or takes care of their workers is approaching the workers, talking to them, and see the reaction of the farmer. Sometimes they get very not upset, but they get kind of nervous or anxious when they see people talking to the migrant workers, because they don't want the workers to get close to anyone, or people getting close to the migrant workers. So just go and talk to them, make them feel that they're part of the community too, that we care of them. We're interested in knowing who they are, what they want. Have they rested well before coming to the farmer's market? If a farmer's market is on Sundays, that's usually the day off of the worker. So if they're there and then the next day they have to start working again very early in the morning, that worker is not gonna have good rest before working again. So just go and talk to them and make them feel that they are part of the community. They're appreciated and respected, because one of the problems or things is that they're really invisible. We're not taking them as part of us or this society. They're over there. They're not part of us, but they really are part of us. They're actually working for us.
Thank you so much.
And I want to add something. The low wage that they are receiving, because they receive only $10.49 an hour, and they pay taxes, they contribute to the CPP, to EI, like any other Canadian worker. That's the that's the justification that many employers and people are giving for us to have food, cheap food. So we're really buying cheap food, sometimes, not always, and not everywhere. But it's because these workers are really getting a very little from, from yeah, from their work.
Well, it sounds like you've given us a few ways that we can actually go into a market and kind of with that lens on, see, whether or not we can actually vote with our dollars in that way, be a bit more critical with our money, and choose certain vendors that we think are more taking care of their workers. Rebecca, I was wondering your thoughts on this idea of accessibility and steps that we could take. Please share your...
Sure. Steps that we can take to make local food more accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Finding places, when we're talking about growing food ourselves, it can be very challenging in this city in particular to find places to be able to grow food and to find the time, which is equally as insurmountable in a lot of cases. And we have this really weird dichotomy with Vancouver pushing hard to be the greenest city in the world, having a lot of support from the city to want to empower people to access more local food, and yet we have this real hard stop challenge to actually do it because we have extremely high real estate prices, and we also have a very dense city compared to others. So even when you look at our close neighbors, like Seattle, for instance, which has some interesting initiatives, there's an immediate challenge there that we really just can't find the space. So to give you one example of a way to work around that, if you have the wherewithal and really want to be able to take some food production into your own hands, one of the ways to get around that is to do yard sharing with others, which is how I grow my food. It's a family property that I don't live there. It's a 40-minute bike ride away, and that becomes a family project. It becomes a way that I can connect with other people in my communities. Again, you have to be dedicated to want to do it, and that's not going to be for everyone. But it's an interesting option that's out there. And again, although this will never provide all of our food, it's interesting to note that growing food in a residential setting was, until very recently, a part of our food security. Even looking at World War II and when there were food shortages, gardens actually became a really important source of how we got fresh vegetables. So that's something to think about. Beyond that, getting access to food, the challenging thing is that it sometimes takes a lot more work and resources and research than many of us in our challenging days are able to spend or even figure out how to do. And sometimes it takes the extra step. Even getting to the farmer's market, like I love the farmer's market, but I find it personally really challenging as someone who has a full-time job and a lot of other constraints. They're usually open on a weekday afternoon for about 4 hours, and literally I'm usually at work for all of that time. So as much as we may have the attention to do the best job we can, at the end of the day, for myself and my family and for a lot of people, you're going to have to go to the grocery store that's open till 9, 10 p.m. and get that food that you can't ask the worker or the farmer how it was produced, and then the connection is immediately cut, even if it says it was grown in BC. So increasing food accessibility, to get more food from BC or locally, that's going to be a challenge and probably something that will have to come from a very pretty high level. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's definitely something that my colleagues at the city, we often have to deal with as well, in terms of, what can we actually be providing, and what is our role as advocates. And so, it's building a lot of those connections really to make things work and to make things more accessible, because I have in my work as a community developer, I remember this story of one of the First Nations youth that I worked with, and she was a young single mother, and came across somebody who berated her for not growing food for her children, because they're like, growing food is really good, and this is something you should be doing, and if you care about your children, um, you should be able to do that, and yet at the same time, not really recognizing some of the socioeconomic barriers that a lot of people are facing to grow their own food, to make those specific systems available. So, I think when we talk about these steps that we can take, they're really not so much about, often we don't have opportunities to find ways of making wholesale change. It's very incremental in many ways and dispersed. But it sounds like there are a lot of different solutions.
If I can
already.
just add one little thought to that, as I'm listening to you, being able to do all these things, growing your own food, getting to the farmers market, joining a CSA, which is another really important part of this piece, cooking your own food, and all of that. Like even in my very privileged personal experience, you have to come from such a place of calm and having resources to even begin to think about doing any of this. Like I know when I've had a really exhausting day, just to give a really tiny example, like cooking is really hard to do when you're not feeling up to it. And I can only imagine if I've been working for 6 or 7 hours straight, to be able to then go and cook a meal after you've burned like 3,000-4,000 calories just doing that is like I can't even imagine doing that. And I've been out to some of those farms and met a number of the workers. Thankfully there are some farms where you can actually get in and talk to people. But you need to have the resources and come from a really calm and pretty lucky place to be able to start to do any of this.
And it sounds like that's definitely a challenge with migrant workers that are keeping our food system running. And alluding to the earlier points that you were making, Alexandra.
Yeah, we've been also thinking that we need another label. It's not only green, local, organic, but also ethical food that we need too. So we can honor what is happening in the work in the fields too, like on the farms. Because you really, and I'm speaking as a consumer, to go to a super grocery store and see, I try to find local, green, organic, but I also see, when I see the label of where that food is coming from, and I see the name of the farm, and I remember the problems that the workers have had there, I feel like, okay, so or we find tomatoes from 2 different farms, and we're trying to remember which one is less worse than the other one. It's difficult. It's very difficult. So I think that we need another label for sure. Ethic food. I think that Sorry.
Yeah. Sure.
Something that I found very interesting as someone who's primarily plant-based, but when I source other things, really do care about how these animals are treated, is that there's so much conversation about that and never about the farm workers themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting because it seems like a very sort of compassionate thing that we do as humans to worry about how these animals are treated. And for me, it's also a big sustainability issue, but not treating the people who are growing the food or even taking care of the animals in a ethical way, and it isn't sustainable either. And I just think that's something to think about, because we're losing the human connection. Like, yes, our food comes from the land, it comes from these animals, but there's people behind that as well.
Can I say something about sustainability? And that's also the question about sustainability. How sustainable the food system in Canada is when we depend on migrant workers. And let me tell you, the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program is a model in Canada for other countries. So I don't think that program is going to end soon. I think that it's growing and stronger every year. There's the federal government I think that they're reviewing the temporary foreign workers program, and the seasonal agricultural workers program is part of that. But usually the changes that the TFWP, temporary foreign workers program, has had in the last years, none of those changes apply to the seasonal agricultural workers program. So that program I'm pretty sure that is gonna grow, and unfortunately, I don't see, I hope, but I'm not sure I'm very eclectic? No.
Eclectic?
Yeah, that one. About seeing good changes to benefit the workers, but because all the changes have been to, for sure, benefit the employers. And so I don't want you to feel that I'm against or pro someone, but you can see the facts and see how the program is really not benefiting, well, is benefiting more employer or one side than the other. Yeah, one of the things, for instance, one small example is workers have no say in their contract. I, as a worker, want to be part of negotiating my contract. They are not part of that. Only the federal government with the other participant country are the ones who talk about what is best for the workers, what the workers need, how the contract should be. And the federal government receives a lot of input from the agricultural lobby, not from the worker side. So that's one piece that is that can show how unbalanced is the power in this in this situation, in this program. Yeah.
And it sounds like, in that way, the voices need to be migrant workers need to be actually at the decision-making tables at the very top.
Yeah, that's one of the demands that we're trying, or that they're asking. Like, they want to be part of that contract that is affecting them positively and negatively every year, every season. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
No worries. No, I was just thinking, what was I thinking? I forgot what I was saying.
No. But what I was gonna say is but migrant workers can do it by themselves.
No.
They need the solidarity and support of the Canadian society. So they have to do it for sure, but they need support. And if we recognize and we're aware that they're part of this society, we need to support them. And not just because they're not Canadian or landed immigrants. Is the problem? I think that we need to be working in solidarity with them for sure. Yeah.
The question is for you, right on this topic, is how do we in this room, how do we be a part of that? How do we help? How do we make a positive change or be a voice to speak for the migrant workers? How do we be involved?
Yeah.
So, like you were saying, we take a socially responsible ethical farmer who raises ethical meat, then how do we choose that vegetable farmer? Or more so, how do we help the migrant workers? While I was sitting here, I was Googling the governing bodies. I didn't know anything about it. So, how do you...
Well, you're welcome to be part of the Migrant Workers Dignity Association. Yeah, that's one thing. That's one way. But the other way, I think, that is to get close to the workers in any organized way. And I mean organized by organized, I mean organize your group of friends, go to visit the farms, see by yourself what is happening there, talk to the workers. Maybe the workers are not going to tell you everything the first time, but if you build a relationship with them, I'm pretty sure that you're going to start seeing other things that you don't see when you just go visit and then leave. But we need to build relationships with them, so because they can tell you what they think you want to hear or the employer wants them to say, but it's another story when you start building relationships with them, for sure. Yeah, you're welcome to be part of the Migrant Workers Dignity Association too.
Well, on that note, I think we'll turn it over to questions, if that's all right. And we have a very patient person in the very back there who's...
I just want to talk about gardening versus urban farming. Because gardening really isn't farming.
Yeah.
In a sense, I would like to see the city do more urban farming. And for myself, I can't do that, but I'd be happy to contribute by doing the books or something like that. But with urban farming, one of the problems we have in the city is you don't really grow food, you grow soil. And we keep on just having these beds where we add more soil. At the same time, developers in some parts of the city and in like further out are actually destroying topsoil.
Yeah.
So how does the city feel about conserving topsoil and having better gardens and backyards and using spaces for more urban farming?
Yeah, awesome. So gardening and urban farming, of course, two very different things. As a gardener, I'm growing food for myself and my family. Someone who's a farmer is growing food for sale to the community, and that's a very important distinction. The question of growing soil is a really interesting one that you bring up because as we're seeing in Vancouver, just like any other urban setting, we have soil in general that is in pretty bad shape unless it is really worked on for a number of years or unless we bring soil in. And with urban farms, first of all, there's been recently introduced legislation to allow urban farms to have business licenses, and that is a new development that is going to legitimize urban farming and may allow for some more permanent business structures to be in place. But we have a range of how those farms are set up. It can look like anything from taking a number of literally backyards and turning those into farm spaces. That's one of the ways that an urban farm can look like, having a farmer come in. And it can look like something like Soul Food Farms, for instance, which has several sites around the downtown area, many of which, because of the soil considerations that you're talking about, are in completely enclosed raised beds. I don't know how many of you have seen those on the Concord Pacific lands, but they have brought topsoil in because the ground is, in that case, it's concrete, but it's also very contaminated. Soil contamination is one of these areas that I'm starting to care more and more about. And we have soil that can be high in things that we really don't want, like lead, for instance. And we have farms and gardens that exist on fallowed gas stations as well. So this soil is a big issue. We have urban farms that are on, we have community gardens, and I'm not sure about urban farms per se that are on temporary land spaces as well. And I think that's some of what you're talking about in terms of you can't take those years to start adding compost and building soil. So what is the solution to that? I hope that we can find more permanent spaces. I think that some of that may come with some of the new developments that are going to happen in the city. I can't say for sure, but I think there will be some opportunities if people push for it to have, I hope, more permanent urban farm spaces. And we also have another totally different wrinkle, which we haven't talked about, which is the new movement towards soil-less hydroponic farms that are in towers and that are completely enclosed using water only. I'm a gardener who works with soil, so I feel like I need to learn a lot more about that before I decide how I think. The solutions are hard to come by right now. Like that's my honest feeling. We don't have a perfect situation for that, but I hope that we can have some permanence to those types of spaces.
And as somebody who works at the city, you can definitely see the many different layers of the systems that need to function within an urban setting, and so sometimes they're competing in terms of competing goals of trying to put more density in, while at the same time ensuring that there are some local food systems functions that are maintained and enhanced. And so, I think part of it will be it's a slower transition. Sometimes it needs to be faster, and there needs to be tools in place to see where local food can be enhanced in a particularly high density situation. And so, a lot of times I know that the City of Vancouver is working with Metro Vancouver and aligning to find out where those higher opportunity, opportunities for enhancing soil or maybe maintaining soils from neighboring municipalities. While here, it's much more about how do we facilitate kind of smaller operations that may not get the volume of food that we're hoping didn't necessarily grow. Maybe it's more intense types of farming, but exploring kind of those directions.
One last really quick thing I want to add when we're talking about soil is keeping in mind the soil cycle that goes all the way to the waste stream and back again into composting. And I think the city has done some good work so far to ensure that we have good ability to compost even if it's off-site. There are some challenges that are still to be worked out with farms that want to be able to do medium to large-ish scale composting on site, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But the full cycle on the waste stream is a really important part of this as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the gentleman.
The 2 points I want to make, and both relate to the larger systemic problem that doesn't get talked about enough. First of all, while Alejandro was explaining about migrant workers, it occurred to me that this was exactly the same situation as existed in apartheid South Africa, where I grew up. And during apartheid, the South African economy was one of the fastest growing. I think only the Russian economy beat them in terms of expansion. And the way that they did this was that they'd bring in the workers from the Bantustan and pay them not enough to reproduce themselves because their wives were back on the Bantustan and the old men were back at the Bantustan growing the food that the family needed, so they could pay these guys less. Whereas in North America, Europe, people had to pay higher wages. So the South African economy benefited. And exactly the same thing is happening here. Corporations are benefiting from this. And the federal government is not likely to side with the workers and oppose the corporations. So that's a reality we have to deal with. Secondly, I'm really becoming quite antagonistic to urban farming. I want community farming, and I don't mean everybody having their little plot that often just doesn't work very well, and people don't understand what they're doing, and they abandon it, and it's ugly, and people are worried about their properties dropping in value because there's horrible stuff going on. For me, it's like the waste of land devoted to grass on the boulevards is terrible. So, I have a $500 grant given to me 6 years ago to grow food on a boulevard in an aesthetically pleasing way that would engage the community around me to emulate that. But I can't use that money, it's still in my bank after 6 years, because the Parks Board and the City Council can't see the point. Okay? Parks Board have said things to me like, we can't have apples dropping on the cars and then getting sued for that.
Yeah, and I worked at the park board for a while, so I understand some of those challenges. And you know, you can definitely come speak to me a little bit later about that. But actually, Gordon Neighborhood House, you can talk to Susanna. She's kind of figuring out ways of making it work and finding interesting avenues to do that. So.
And you can get a tax receipt for your...
Sorry?
You can get a tax receipt.
Possibly. Yeah, and I think you bring up a lot of good points, though, in terms of the, you know, the challenges of making it work in an urban context, and I imagine Alexander might also have something to speak to about your earlier point about your experience in South Africa.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have a bad memory. I have a problem with my memory. Oh yeah. So many people say that 1049 is a lot for workers that come from Central America, because when they convert money, it's a lot of money in Central America. And for sure, it is money. It's good money. Workers have been able to build, reconstruct or build new houses, or the second floor of their house, or whatever. Yeah, is good money for them for sure. But that doesn't mean that they deserve to be, to have their human and labor rights violated in Canada for sure. So it's not morally right, it's not ethically right, it's not politically right. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thank you for your comment for sure. Yeah.
If I can, sorry.
Sorry. By all means.
Oh, just one or two quick points to answer the second part of your question, this frustration with the boulevard gardening. Two things that come to mind. One is that there is a bit of a missing education piece that can happen when you're seeing these disused gardens that aren't growing things very productively. It's something that I'm trying to work on, is getting the education there, because there is this tendency for sure to come in at this time of year, plant a lot of stuff, and then something goes wrong and you don't know how to deal with it. So that's one part of it. And another issue when we're talking about boulevards and places that are very close to the street is, I get a bit wary knowing that there can be real issues with soil contamination, with vandalism, which maybe you want to invite, maybe you don't, and even animal droppings getting into spaces where we're growing food. So if we do it, we want to do it safely and mindfully, and that is a really important aspect of making that aspect of the food system work.
Are we out of time? So thank you all for attending and being here and listening in. And I want to also thank our panelists for being here and offering some very amazing insights. So I just want to... And I know I'll be here for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I will too.
Yeah, so I'm sorry we weren't able to get through all the questions, but feel free to approach